Hello, Bobcats. Mr. Buckman here with the first of a few videos for our lecture on time. And you'll notice that this lecture is going to be in tandem with our lessons on the solar system. There's a very good reason for this. Humans over many generations, over thousands of years, they've associated movement of celestial bodies like the moon, the stars, the sun, things like this, and other planets in order to figure out what time of the day or year it is. And we use these celestial bodies as markers to tell us when something might happen or to have some sort of sense of a schedule, something that is going to recur over and over again, okay? It's a way for us as humans to kind of plan out what we'd like to do with our lives as well, too. Think of all those early humans with agriculture, right? You're going to need to have a very robust understanding of the seasons, of daylight, of nighttime, of all these things in order for your crops to grow well. So what we need to do today for our lecture is to kind of discuss what time is. And before we get into this conversation, what I need you to know is that time is defined by the language and the culture of the people talking about time. There are conceptions of time that exist in the United States, in Europe, in Australia, that can be different from one another. Think about the metric system. We don't use the metric system, but a lot of places around the world do. But you have other groups of people, perhaps people that are still nomadic, that have different conceptions of time, that are different from the seconds, minutes, hours, days, and so forth that we're used to. Just so you need to understand, and I'm going to try to talk about this in a big way, our conceptions of time are derived from the language that we speak and the culture that we come from. Okay, that's very important. But also, it's important to know that what is time? It is a unit of measurement that is known as a dimension. And I'm sure you've heard this word quite a few times, dimension, okay? And it actually comes from, as so many things, it comes from the Latin dimetior or dimensus, which translate to either measurement of time or measurement of space. And it's very important to understand that this idea of time has to do with physical space. Where are certain objects at any given time is how we read time, okay? Time and space, physical space, are related. I'm going to talk about that in just a second here, okay? Now, just a quick review. You guys are probably very familiar with this, but the first and second dimensions, that would be like length and width, all right? This would be a two-dimensional object like a square or a rectangle or a triangle, a closed shape that has an obvious inside and outside. Now, let me show you a quick example of what I'm talking about here. If I draw just a straight line like this is just considered one dimension because it's going from this point to this point, and that's it. Now, if I was to continue this line and do all this crazy stuff, right? Now, technically, this line is still only one dimension because it has not connected with the beginning here, and it hasn't closed off to have an inside and an outside to a shape. The only thing that will give it a second dimension is when we are able to actually have, as I mentioned, an inside to the shape and an outside, that the borders are completely closed off, okay? So length and width, all right? You might think like going this way or going this way, okay? These are measurements going in one direction and another. A good example of this would be your XY grid that you're familiar with, or the latitude and longitude that we've been working with so much, okay? That'd be the first two dimensions, okay? Now, we also have a third dimension. We could call that depth, okay? There might be a few other ways to describe this as well, too. But what we do is we take this very boring shape like a square and we give it a little bit of depth, and not only do we now have length and width, but we also have depth. How deep does it go? Okay, so we have three different metrics or way to measure where a certain point or where to measure certain things, okay? And like all things that I'm talking about, these are units of measurement. Dimensions are units of measurement, okay? Now, once you have these three dimensions, it's important to understand that size, location, position, these can all be determined with these three dimensions, okay? Where is a specific thing happening, or where is your position on our planet, okay? Like, for instance, our global positioning systems here could tell us latitude and longitude, and that's just 2 dimensions, but we might also be able to determine how high in elevation from sea level, and that'd be kind of like depth, okay? Like 3 dimensions. As I mentioned, size, location, and position can be determined with those 3, okay? Now, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Time is what we can kind of consider a 4th dimension. Now, I mention this because we can break down things like meters and feet and miles, and we can break them down as much as we need to, but we can't really work with time in the same regard. But we can still measure it, okay? What I mean by this, let's take this cube right here, okay? And let's pretend that this cube is actually a sphere, our planet, right? And let's go ahead and draw a bunch of lines of latitude and longitude all over there, okay? Obviously, this thing has depth, but I can't draw a sphere, okay? And let's say that we have a specific position right here. This latitude, this longitude, it's also been determined that this specific position is about 12,000 feet above sea level. We've got 3 dimensions here, right? But what we need to also talk about is when a specific event happens. And time can be that 4th dimension where we measure the when. Time is what we measure the when with. So we might say that there was a small meteor that had fallen and had blown up in this area here, but that it happened at about 11:37 a.m. on September 13th, 2021. Okay, I'm just making these dates up, but that would be a way to measure when did it happen. Okay, so 3 dimensions telling length, width, and depth, okay, to show position, size, location, but time being a 4th dimension that can tell us when something has happened. Stay tuned for the next video.